Section 31 of Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, by Samuel Richardson. Section 31. Wednesday night. Nothing particular having passed at dinner or supper, but the most condescending goodness on my lady's side to me, and the highest civilities from Mr. Peter's family, from Lady Jones, from Sir Simon's family, etc., and reciprocal good wishes all round, and a promise obtained from my benefactor that he would endeavour to pass a fortnight or 3 weeks in these parts before the winter set in, I shall conclude this day with observing that I disposed of the money my master was so good to put in my hands, in a manner he was pleased to direct me. And I gave Mrs. Jewkes hers in such a manner as highly pleased her. And she wished me, with tears, all kinds of happiness, and prayed me to forgive all her wickedness to me, as she herself called it. I begged leave of my master to present Mrs. Worden with 5 guineas for a pair of gloves, which he said was well thought of. I should have mentioned that Miss Darnford and I agreed upon a correspondence, which will be no small pleasure to me, for she is an admirable young lady, whom I prefer to every one I have seen, and I shall, I make no doubt, improve by her letters, for she is said to have a happy talent in writing, and is well read for so young a lady. Saturday. On Thursday morning my lady set out for her own seat, and my best friend and I, attended by Mr. Colbrand, Abraham, and Thomas, for this dear house. Her ladyship parted with her brother and me with great tenderness, and made me promise to send her my papers, which I find she intends to entertain Lady Betty with, and another lady or two, her intimates, as also her lord, and hopes to find, as I believe, in the reading of them, some excuse for her brother's choice. My dearest master has been all love and tenderness on the road, as he is in every place, and on every occasion. And oh, what a delightful change was this journey, to that which, so contrary to all my wishes, and so much to my apprehensions, carried me hence to the Lincolnshire house! And how did I bless God at every turn, and at every stage! We did not arrive here till yesterday noon. Abraham rode before, to let them know we were coming, and I had the satisfaction to find everybody there I wished to see. When the chariot entered the courtyard, I was so strongly impressed with the favour and mercies of God Almighty, on remembering how I was sent away the last time I saw this house, the leave I took, the dangers I had encountered, a poor cast-off servant girl, and now returning a joyful wife, and the mistress, through his favour, of the noble house I was turned out of, that I was hardly able to support the joy I felt in my mind on the occasion. He saw how much I was moved, and tenderly asked me why I seemed so affected. I told him, and lifted his dear hand to my lips, and said, O sir, God's mercies and your goodness to me on entering this dear, dear place are above my expression. I can hardly bear the thoughts of them. He said, Welcome, thrice welcome, joy of my life, to your own house, and kissed my hand in return. All the common servants stood at the windows, as unseen as they could, to observe us. He took my hand with the most condescending goodness in the world, and with great complaisance led me into the parlour, and kissed me with the greatest ardour. Welcome again, my dear life, said he, 1,000 times welcome to the possession of a house that is not more mine than yours. I threw myself at his feet. Permit me, dear sir, thus to bless God and thank you for all his mercies and your goodness. O may I so behave as to not be utterly unworthy, and then how happy shall I be! God give me, my dearest, said he, life and health to reward all your sweetness, and no man can be so blessed as I. Where, said he to Abraham, who passed by the door, where is Mr. Jervis? She bolted in. Here, good sir, said she, here, good madam, am I, waiting impatiently till called for, to congratulate you both. I ran to her and clasped my arms about her neck and kissed her. "Oh, my dear Mrs. Jervis," said I, "my other dear mother, receive your happy, happy Pamela, and join with me to bless God and bless our Master for all these great things." I was ready to sink in her arms through excess of joy, to see the dear good woman, who had been so often a mournful witness of my distress, as now of my triumph. "Dearest madam," said she, "you do me too much honour. Let my whole life show the joy I take in your deserved good fortune, and in my duty to you, for the early instance I received of your goodness in your kind letter." "Oh, Mrs. Jervis," replied I, "there all thanks are due, both from you and me, for our dear master granted me this blessing, as I may justly call it, the very first moment I begged it of him." "Your goodness, sir," said she, "I will for ever acknowledge and beg pardon for the wrong step I made in applying to my Lady Davers." He was so good as to salute her, and said, "All is over now, Mrs. Jervis, and I shall not remember you ever disobliged me. I always respected you, and shall now more and more value you, for the sake of that dear good creature, whom, with joy unfeigned, I can call my wife." "God bless your honour for ever," said she, "and many, many happy years may ye live together, the envy and wonder of all who know you." "But where," said my dear master, "is honest Longman, and where is Jonathan?" "Come, Mrs. Jervis," said I, "you shall show me them, and all the good folks presently, and let me go up with you to behold the dear apartments, which I have seen before with such different emotions to what I shall now do." We went up, and in every room, the chamber I took refuge in when my master pursued me, my lady's chamber, her dressing-room, Mrs. Jervis' room, not forgetting her closet, my own little bed-chamber, the green-room, and in each of the others I blessed God for my past escapes and present happiness. And the good woman was quite affected with the zeal and pleasure with which I made my thankful acknowledgments to the divine goodness. "Oh, my excellent lady," said she, "you are still the same good, pious, humble soul I knew you, and your marriage has added to your graces, as I hope it will to your blessings." "Dear Mrs. Jervis," said I, "you know not what I have gone through. You know not what God has done for me. You know not what a happy creature I am now. I have 1,000 things to tell you, and a whole week will be too little, every moment of it spent in relating to you what has befallen me, to make you acquainted with it all. We shall be sweetly happy together, I make no doubt. But I charge you, my dear Mrs. Jervis, whatever you call me before strangers, that when we are by ourselves you call me nothing but your Pamela. For what an ungrateful creature should I be, who have received so many mercies, if I attributed them not to the divine goodness, but assumed to myself insolent airs upon them. No, I hope I shall be more and more thankful, as I am more and more blessed, and more humble, as God, the author of all my happiness, shall more distinguish me." We went down again to the parlour to my dear master. Said he, "Call Longman in again. He longs to see you, my dear." He came in. "God bless you, my sweet lady," said he, "as now, heaven be praised, I may call you. Did I not tell you, madam, that Providence would find you out?" "Oh, Mr. Longman," said I, "God be praised for all his mercies. I am rejoiced to see you." And I laid my hand upon his, and said, "Good Mr. Longman, how do you do? I must always value you, and you don't know how much of my present happiness I owe to the sheets of paper and pens and ink you furnished me with. I hope my dear sir and you are quite reconciled." "Oh, madam," said he, "how good you are! Why, I cannot contain myself for joy." And then he wiped his eyes, good man. Said my master, "Yes, I have been telling Longman that I am obliged to him for his ready return to me, and that I will entirely forget his appeal to Lady Davers, and hope he'll find himself quite as easy and happy as he wishes. My dear partner here, Mr. Longman, I dare promise you, will do all she can to make you so." "Heaven bless you both together," said he. "'Tis the pride of my heart to see this." I returned with double delight when I heard the blessed news, And I'm sure, sir, said he, mark old Longman's words, God will bless you for this every year more and more. You don't know how many hearts you have made happy by this generous deed. I am glad of it, said my dear master. I am sure I have made my own happy. And Longman, though I must think you somebody, yet, as you are not a young man, and so won't make me jealous, I can allow you to wish my dear wife joy in the tenderest manner. Adad, sir, said he, I am sure you rejoice me with your favour. 'Tis what I longed for, but durst not presume. My dear, said my master, receive the compliment of one of the honestest hearts in England, that always revered your virtues. And the good man saluted me with great respect, and said, God in heaven bless you both, and knelt on one knee. I must quit your presence, indeed I must. And away he went. Your goodness, sir, said I, knows no bounds. Oh, may my gratitude never find any. I saw, said my master, when the good man approached you, that he did with so much awe and love mingled together, that I fancied he longed to salute my angel, and I could not but indulge his honest heart. How blessed am I, said I, and kissed his hand, and indeed I make nothing now of kissing his dear hand, as if it was my own. When honest old Mr. Jonathan came in to attend at dinner, so clean, so sleek, and so neat, as he always is, with his silver hair, I said, Well, Mr. Jonathan, how do you do? I am glad to see you. You look as well as ever, thank God. Oh, dear madam, said he, better than ever to have such a blessed sight. God bless you and my dear master. And I hope, sir, said he, you'll excuse all my past failings. Ay, that I will, Jonathan, said he, because you never had any, but what your regard for my dear wife here was the occasion of. And now I can tell you, you can never err, because you cannot respect her too much. Oh, sir, said he, your honour is exceedingly good. I'm sure I shall always pray for you both. After dinner, Mr. Longman coming in and talking of some affairs under his care, he said afterwards, All your honour's servants are now happy, for Robert, who left you, had a pretty little fortune fallen to him, or he would never have quitted your service. He was here but yesterday to inquire whether you and my lady returned hither, and hoped he might have leave to pay his duty to you both. Ay, said my master, I shall be glad to see honest Robert, for that's another of your favourites, Pamela. It was high time, I think, I should marry you, were it but to engage the respects of all my family to myself. There are, sir, said I, 10,000 reasons why I should rejoice in your goodness. But I was going to say, said Mr. Longman, that all your honour's old servants are now happy but one. You mean John Arnold, said my master. I do indeed, said he, if you'll excuse me, sir. Oh, said I have had my prayers for poor John answered as favourably as I could wish. Why, said Mr. Longman, to be sure poor John has acted no very good part, take it altogether. But he so much honoured you, sir, and so much respected you, madam, that he would have been glad to have been obedient to both, and so was faithful to neither. But indeed the poor fellow's heart is almost broke, and he won't look out for any other place, and says he must live in your honour's service, or he must die wretched very shortly. Mrs. Jervis was here when this was said. Indeed, said she, the poor man had been here every day since he heard the tidings that have rejoiced us all, and he says he hopes he shall yet be forgiven. Is he in the house now? Said my master. He is, sir, and was here when your honour came in, and played at hide-and-seek to have one look at you both when you alighted, and was ready to go out of his wits for joy when he saw your honour hand my lady in. Pamela, said my dear master, you're to do with John as you please. You have full power. Then pray, sir, said I, let poor John come in. The poor fellow came in with so much confusion that I have never seen a countenance that expressed so lively a consciousness of his faults and mingled joy and shame. How do you do, John? Said I. I hope you are very well. The poor fellow could hardly speak, and looked with awe upon my master and pleasure upon me. Said my master, Well, John, there is no room to say anything to a man that has so much concern already. I am told you will serve me whether I will or not, but I turn you over altogether to my spouse here, and she is to do by you as she pleases. You see, John, said I, your good master's indulgence. Well may I forgive you that have so generous an example. I was always persuaded of your honest intentions, if you had known how to distinguish between your duty to your master and your goodwill to me. You will now have no more puzzles on that account, from the goodness of your dear master. I shall be but too happy, I said to the poor man. God bless your honour. God bless you, madam. I now have the joy of my soul in serving you both, and I will make the best of servants to my power. Well then, John, said I, your wages will go on as if you had never left your master. May I not say so, sir? Said I. Yes, surely, my dear, replied he, and augment them too, if you find his duty to you deserve it. 1,000 millions of thanks, said the poor man. I am very well satisfied, and desire no augmentation. And so he withdrew, overjoyed, and Mrs. Jervis and Mr. Longman were highly pleased, for though they were incensed against him for his fault to me, when matters looked badly for me, yet they and all his fellow servants always loved John. When Mr. Longman and Mrs. Jervis had dined, they came in again, to know if he had any commands. And my dear master, filling a glass of wine, said, Longman, I am going to toast the happy and honestest couple in England, my dear Pamela's father and mother. Thank you, dear sir, said I. I think, continued he, that little Kentish purchase wants a manager, and as it is a little out of your way, Longman, I have been proposing, if I thought Mr. Andrews would accept it, that he should enter upon Hodge's farm that was, and so manage for me that whole little affair, and we will well stock the farm for him and make it comfortable, and I think if he will take that trouble upon him, it will be an ease for you and a favour for me. Your honour, said he, cannot do a better thing, and I have had some inkling given to me that you may, if you please, augment that estate by a purchase of equal amount contiguous to it, and as you have so much money to spare, I can't see your honour can do better. Well, said he, let me have the particulars another time, and we will consider about it. But, my dear, added he, you'll mention this to your father, if you please. I have too much money, Longman, continued he, lies Eustace, though upon this occasion I shall not grudge laying out as much in liveries and other things, as if I had married a lady of a fortune equal, if possible, to my Pamela's merit, and I reckon you have a good deal in hand. Yes, sir, said he, more than I wish I had. But I have a mortgage in view if you don't buy that Kentish thing, that I believe will answer very well, and when matters are riper, will mention it to your honour. I took with me to Lincolnshire, said my master, upward of 600 guineas, and thought to have laid most of them out there. Thank God, thought I, you did not. He offered me 500 of them, you know. But I have not laid out above 250 of them. So 200 I left there in my escritoire, because I shall go again for a fortnight or so before winter, and 200 I have brought with me, and I have money, I know not what, in 3 places here, the account of which is my pocket-book in my library. You have made some little presents, Pamela, to my servants there on our nuptials, and these 200 I have brought up, I will put it into your disposal, that with some of them you shall do here as you did there. I am ashamed, good sir, said I, to be so costly and so worthless. Pray, my dear, replied he, say not a word of that. Said Mr. Longman, why, madam, with money and stocks and one thing and another, his honour could buy half the gentlemen around him. He wants not money, and lays up every year, and it would have been pity but his honour should have wedded just as he has. Very true, Longman, said my master, and pulling out his purse, said, tell out my dear 200 guineas, and give me the rest. I did, sir. Now, said he, take them yourself for the purposes I mentioned. But, Mr. Longman, do you before sunset bring my dear girl 50 pounds, which is her due this day by my promise, and every 3 months from this day pay her 50 pounds, which will be 200 pounds per annum. And this is for her to lay out at her own discretion, and without account, in such way as shall derive a blessing upon us all, for she was my mother's almoner, and shall be mine, and her own too. I'll go for it this instant, said Mr. Longman. When he was done, I looked upon my dear generous master, and on Mrs. Jervis, and he gave me a nod of assent, and I took 20 guineas, and said, Dear Mrs. Jervis, accept of this, which is no more than my generous master ordered me to present to Mrs. Jewkes, for a pair of gloves on my happy nuptials. And so you, who are much better entitled to them by the love I bear you, must not refuse them. Said she, Mrs. Jewkes was on the spot, madam, at the happy time. Yes, said my master, but Pamela would have rejoiced to have had you there instead of her. That I should, sir, replied I, or instead of anybody excepting my own mother. She gratefully accepted them, and thanked us both, but I don't know what she should thank me for I was not worth a fourth of them myself. I'll have you, my dear, said he, in some handsome manner, as you know how, oblige Longman to accept of a like present. Mr. Longman returned from his office, and brought me the £50, saying, I have entered this new article with great pleasure. To my lady £50, to be paid the same sum quarterly. Oh, sir, said I, what will become of me, to be so poor in myself, and so rich in your bounty? It is a shame to take all that your profuse goodness would heap upon me thus. But indeed it shall not be without account. Make no words, my dear, said he. Are you not my wife? And have I not endowed you with my goods? And hitherto this is a very small part. Mr. Longman, said I, and Mrs. Jervis, you both see how I am even oppressed with unreturnable obligations. God bless the donor, and the receiver too, said Mr. Longman. I am sure they will bring back good interest, for, madam, you have a bountiful heart, and I have seen the pleasure you used to take to dispense my late lady's alms and donations. I'll warrant, Mr. Longman, said I, notwithstanding you are so willing to have me take large sums for nothing at all, I should affront you, if I asked you to accept from me a pair of gloves only on account of my happy nuptials. He seemed not readily to know how to answer, and my master said, If Longman refuse you, my dear, he may be said to refuse your first favour. On that I put 20 guineas in his hand, but he insisted upon it that he would take but 5. I said, I must desire you to oblige me, Mr. Longman, or I shall think I have affronted you. Well, if I must, said he, I know what I know. What is that, Mr. Longman? Said I. Why, madam, I will not lay it out till my young master's birthday, which I hope will be within this 12-month. Not expecting anything like this from the old gentleman, I looked at my master, and then blushed so, I could not hold up my head. Charmingly said Longman, said my master, and clasped me in his arms. O my dear life, God send it may be so. You have quite delighted me, Longman, though I durst not have said such a thing for the world. Madam, said the old gentleman, I beg your pardon. I hope no offence, but I'd speak it 10 times in a breath to have it so. Take it how you please, as long as my good master takes it so well. Mrs. Jervis, said my master, this is an over-nice dear creature. You don't know what a life I have had with her, even on this side matrimony. Said Mrs. Jervis, I think Mr. Longman says very well. I'm sure I shall hope for it too. Mr. Longman, who had struck me of a heap, withdrawing soon after, my master said, Why, my dear, you can't look up. The old man said nothing shocking. I did not expect it, though, from him, said I. I was not aware but of some innocent pleasantry. Why, so it was, said he, both innocent and pleasant, and I won't forgive you if you don't say as he says. Come, speak before Mrs. Jervis. May everything happen, sir, that will give you delight. That's my dearest love, said he, and kissed me with great tenderness. When the servants had dined, I desired to see the maidens, and all 4 came up together. You are welcome home, madam, said Rachel. We rejoice all to see you here, and more to see you, our lady. Oh, my good acquaintances, said I joy to see you. How do you do, Rachel? How do you all do? And I took each of them by the hand, and could have kissed them. For, said I to myself, I kissed you all last time I saw you in sorrow. Why should I not kiss you all with joy? But I forbore, in honour of their master's presence. They seemed quite transported with me, and my good master was pleased with the scene. See here, my lasses, said he to your mistress. I need not bid you respect her, for you always loved her, and she'll have it as much in her power as inclination to be kind to the deserving. Indeed, said I shall always be a kind friend to you, and your dear master has ordered me to give each of you this, that you may rejoice with me on my happiness. And so I gave them 5 guineas apiece, and said, God bless you, every one. I am overjoyed to see you. And they withdrew with the greatest gratitude and pleasure, praying for us both. I turned to my dear master. 'Tis to you, dear sir, said I, next to God, who put it into your generous heart, that all my happiness is owing, that my mind thus overflows with joy and gratitude. And I would have kissed his hand, but he clasped me in his arms and said, You deserve it, my dear, you deserve it all. Mrs. Jervis came in. Said she, I have seen a very affecting sight. You have made your maidens quite happy, madam, with your kindness and condescension. I saw them all 4 as I came by the hall door, just got up from their knees, praising and praying for you both. Dear good bodies, said I, and did Jane pray too? May their prayers be returned upon themselves, I say. My master sent for Jonathan, and I held up all the fingers of my 2 hands, and my master giving a nod of approbation as he came in, I said, Well, Mr. Jonathan, I could not be satisfied without seeing you in form, as it were, and thanking you for all your past good will to me. You'll accept of that up for a pair of gloves on this happy occasion. And I gave him 10 guineas, and took his honest hand between both mine. God bless you, said I, with your silver hairs, so like my dear father. I shall always value such a good old servant of the best of masters. And he said, Oh, such goodness, such kind words! It is a balm to my heart. Blessed be God, I have lived to this day. And his eyes swam in tears, and he withdrew. My dear, said my master, you make every one happy. Oh, sir, said I, 'tis you, 'tis you. And let my grateful heart always spring to my lips to acknowledge the blessings you heap upon me. Then in came Harry and Isaac and Benjamin and the 2 grooms of this house, and Arthur the gardener, for my dear master had ordered them by Mrs. Jervis thus to be marshalled out. And he said, Where's John? Poor John was ashamed, and did not come in till he heard himself called for. I said to them, How do you do, my old friends and fellow servants? I am glad to see you all. My master said, I have given you a mistress, my lads, that is the joy of my heart. You see her goodness and condescension. Let your respect to her be but answerable, and she'll be proportionately as great a blessing to you all as she is to me. Harry said, In the name of all your servants, sir, I bless your honour and your good lady, and it be all our studies to deserve her ladyship's favours as well as your honours. And so I gave every one 5 guineas, to rejoice, as I said, in my happiness. When I came to John, I said, I saw you before, John, but I again tell you, I am glad to see you. He said, he was quite ashamed and confounded. Oh, said I, forget everything that's past, John. Your dear good master will, and so will I. For God has wonderfully brought about all these things by the very means I once thought most grievous. Let us therefore look forward, and be only ashamed to commit faults for the time to come, for they may not always be attended with like happy consequences. Arthur, said my master, I have brought you a mistress that is a great gardener. She'll show you a new way to plant beans, and never anybody had such a hand at improving a sunflower as she. Oh, sir, said I, but a little lashed. All my improvements in every kind of thing are owing to you, I'm sure. And so I think I was even with the dear man, and yet appeared grateful before his servants. They withdrew, blessing us both, as the rest had done. And then came in the postilion and 2 helpers, for my master has both here and at Lincolnshire fine haunting horses, and it is the chief sport he takes delight in, as also the scullion boy. And I said, How do all of you? And how dost do, Tommy? I hope you're very good. Here your dear master has ordered you something apiece in honour of me. And my master holding 3 fingers to me, I gave the postilion and helpers 3 guineas each, and the little boy 2, and bid him let his poor mother lay it out for him, for he must not spend it idly. Mr. Colbrand, Abraham, and Thomas I had before presented at t'other house. And when they are all gone but Mrs. Jervis, I said, And now, dearest sir, permit me on my knees thus to bless you and pray for you. And oh, may God crown you with the length of days and increase of honour, and may your happy, happy Pamela, by her grateful heart, appear always worthy in your dear eyes, though she cannot be so in her own, nor those of any others. Mrs. Jervis, said my master, you see the excellence of this sweet creature. And when I tell you that the charms of her person, all lovely as she is, bind me not so strongly to her as the graces of her mind, congratulate me, that my happiness is built on so stable a basis. Indeed, I do most sincerely, sir, said she. This is a happy day for me. I stepped into the library while he was thus pouring out his kindness for me to Mrs. Jervis, and blessed God there on my knees, for the difference I now found to what I had once known in it. And when I have done the same thing in the first scene of my fears, the once frightful summer house, I shall have gone through most of my distressful scene with gratitude, but shall never forbear thanking God in my mind for his goodness to me in every one. Mrs. Jervis, I find, had whispered him what I had done above, and he saw me upon my knees with my back towards him, unknown to me, but softly put through the door again as he had opened it a little way. And I said, not knowing that he had seen me, You have some charming pictures here, sir. Yes, said he, my dear life, so I have, but none so equal to that which your piety affords me. And may the God you delight to serve bless more and more, my dear angel. Sir, said I, you are all goodness. I hope, replied he, after your sweet example, I shall be better and better. Do you think, my dear father and mother, there was ever so happy a creature as I? To be sure, it would be very ungrateful to think with uneasiness, or anything but compassion, of poor Miss Sally Godfrey. He ordered Jonathan to let the evening be passed merrily but wisely, as he said, with what every one liked, whether wine or October. He was pleased afterwards to lead me upstairs, and gave me possession of my lady's dressing-room and cabinet, and her fine repeating watch and equipage, and, in short, of a complete set of diamonds that were his good mother's, as also of the 2 pair of diamond earrings, the 2 diamond rings, and diamond necklace he mentioned in his naughty articles, which her ladyship intended for presents to Miss Tomlins, a rich heiress, that was proposed for his wife, when he was just come from his travels, but which went off after all was agreed upon both the friend's side, because he approved not her conversation, and she had, as he told his mother, too masculine an air, and he never could be brought to see her but once, though the lady liked him very well. He presented me also with her ladyship's books, pictures, linen, lace, etc., that were in her apartments, and bid me call those apartments mine. O give me, my good God, humility and gratitude. End of section 31.
Section 32 of Pamela or Virtue Rewarded. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Pamela or Virtue Rewarded by Samuel Richardson. Section 32. Sunday night. This day, as matters could not be ready for our appearance at a better place, we stayed at home. and my dear master employed himself a good deal in his library, and I have been taken up pretty much, I hope as I ought to be, in thankfulness, prayer, and meditation in my newly presented closet. And I hope God will be pleased to give a blessing to me, for I have the pleasure to think I am not puffed up with this great alteration. And yet am I not wanting to look upon all these favors and blessings in the light wherein I ought to receive them, both at the hands of heaven and my dear benefactor. We dined together with great pleasure, and I had, in every word and action, all the instances of kindness and affection that the most indulged heart could wish. He said he would return to his closet again, and at 5 o'clock would come and take a walk with me in the garden; and so retired as soon as he had dined, and I went up to mine. About 6 he was pleased to come up to me, and said, "Now, my dear, I will attend you for a little walk in the garden," and I gave him my hand with great pleasure. This garden is much better cultivated than the Lincolnshire one, but that is larger, and has nobler walks in it; and yet there is a pretty canal in this, and a fountain and cascade. We had a deal of sweet conversation as we walked; and, after we had taken a turn round, I bent towards the little garden; and when I came near the summer house, took the opportunity to slip from him, and just whipped up the steps of this once frightful place, and kneeled down, and said, I bless thee, O God, for my escapes, and for thy mercies. O let me always possess a grateful humble heart. And I whipped down again, and joined him, and he hardly missed me. Several of the neighboring gentry sent their compliments to him on his return, but not a word about his marriage, particularly Mr. Arthur, Mr. Towers, Mr. Brooks, and Mr. Martin of the Grove. Monday. I had a good deal of employment in choosing patterns for my new clothes. He thought nothing too good, but I thought everything I saw was, and he was so kind to pick out 6 of the richest for me to choose 3 suits out of, saying, we would furnish ourselves with more in town, when we went thither. One was white, flowered with silver most richly, and he was pleased to say, that, as I was a bride, I should make my appearance in that the following Sunday. And so we shall have in 2 or 3 days, from several places, nothing but mantua makers and tailors at work. Bless me! What a chargeable and what a worthless hussy I am to the dear gentleman! But his fortune and station require a great deal of it, and his value for me will not let him do less, than if he had married a fortune equal to his own; and then, as he says, it would be a reflection upon him if he did; and so I doubt it will be as it is; for either way the world will have something to say. He made me also choose some very fine laces and linen, and was sent a message on purpose, with his orders, to hasten all down what can be done in town as the millinery matters, etc., to be completed there, and sent by particular messengers as done. All to be here and finished by Saturday afternoon without fail. I sent away John this morning, with some more of my papers to you, and with the few he will give you separate. My desire is, that you will send me all the papers you have done with, that I may keep my word with Lady Davers; to beg the continuance of your prayers and blessings; to hope you will give me your answer about my dear benefactor's proposal of the Kentish farm; to beg you to buy 2 suits of clothes each; of the finest cloth for you, my dear father, and of a creditable silk for you, my dear mother; and good linen, and every thing answerable; and that you will, as my best friend bid me say, let us see you here as soon as possible, and he will have his chariot come for you, and you will tell John the day. Oh, how I long to see you both, my dear good parents, and to share with you my felicities! You will have, I'm sure, the goodness to go to all your creditors, which are chiefly those of my poor unhappy brothers, and get an account of all you are bound for; and every one shall be paid to the utmost farthing, and interest besides, though some of them have been very cruel and unrelenting; but they are entitled to their own, and shall be thankfully paid. Now I think of it, John shall take my papers down to this place, that you may have something to amuse you, of your dear child's, instead of those you part with, and I will continue writing till I am settled, and you are determined, and then I shall apply myself to the duties of the family, in order to become as useful to my dear benefactor as my small abilities will let me. If you think a couple of guineas will be of use to Mrs. Mumford, who, I doubt, has not much aforehand, pray give them to her from me, and I will return them to you, as for a pair of gloves on my nuptials. And look through your poor acquaintances and neighbors, and let me have a list of such honest industrious poor as may be true objects of charity, and have no other assistance, particularly such as are blind, lame, or sickly, with their several cases; and also such poor families and housekeepers as are reduced by misfortunes, as ours was, and where a great number of children may keep them from rising to a state of tolerable comfort. And I will choose as well as I can; for I long to be making a beginning, with the kind quarterly benevolence my dear good benefactor has bestowed upon me for such good purposes. I am resolved to keep account of all these matters, and Mr. Longman has already furnished me with a vellum book of white paper, some sides of which I hope soon to fill with the names of proper objects; and though my dear master has given me all this without account, yet shall he see, but nobody else, how I lay it out, from quarter to quarter; and I will, if any be left, carry it on, like an accomptant, to the next quarter, and strike a balance 4 times a year, and a general balance at every year's end. And I have written in it, Humble returns for divine mercies, and locked it up safe in my newly presented cabinet. I intend to let Lady Davers see no farther of my papers, than to her own angry letter to her brother; for I would not have her see my reflections upon it; and she'll know, down to that place, all that's necessary for her curiosity as to my sufferings, and the stratagems used against me, and the honest part I have been enabled to act. And I hope, when she has read them all, she will be quite reconciled; for she will see it is all God Almighty's doings; and that a gentleman of his parts and knowledge was not to be drawn in by such a poor young body as me. I will detain John no longer. He will tell you to read this last part first, and while he stays. And so, with my humble duty to you both, and my dear Mr. B.'s kind remembrance, I rest, Your ever dutiful and gratefully happy daughter. Wednesday evening. Honored Father and Mother, I will now proceed with my journal. On Tuesday morning, my dear sir rode out, and brought with him to dinner Mr. Martin of the Grove, and Mr. Arthur and Mr. Brooks, and one Mr. Chambers; and he stepped up to me, and said he had rode out too far to return to breakfast; but he had brought with him some of his old acquaintance, to dine with me. Are you sorry for it, Pamela? said he. I remembered his lessons, and said, No, sure, sir, I cannot be angry at anything you are pleased to do. Said he, You know Mr. Martin's character, and have severely censured him in one of your letters, as one of my brother rakes, and for his 3 lyings in. He then gave me the following account, how he came to bring them. Said he, I met them all at Mr. Arthur's, and his lady asked me, if I was really married. I said, Yes, really. And to whom? said Mr. Martin. Why, replied I bluntly, to my mother's waiting maid. They could not tell what to say to me hereupon, and looked upon one another; and I saw I had spoiled a jest from each. Mrs. Arthur said, You have indeed, sir, a charming creature as ever I saw, and she has mighty good luck. Ay, said I, and so have I. But I shall say the less, because a man never did anything of this nature, that he did not think he ought, if it were but in policy, to make the best of it. Nay, said Mr. Arthur, if you have sinned, it is with your eyes open, for you know the world as well as any gentleman of your years in it. Why really, gentlemen, said I should be glad to please all my friends, but I can't expect, till they know my motives and inducements, that it will be so immediately; but I do assure you I am exceedingly pleased myself, and that you know is most to the purpose. Said Mr. Brooks, I have heard my wife praise your spouse, that is, so much for person and beauty, that I wanted to see her of all things. Why, replied I, if you'll all go and take a dinner with me, you shall see her with all my heart. And Mrs. Arthur, will you bear us company? No, indeed, sir, said she. What, I'll warrant, my wife will not be able to reconcile you to my mother's waiting maid. Is not that it? Tell truth, Mrs. Arthur. Nay, said she, I shan't be backward to pay your spouse a visit, in company of the neighbouring ladies; but for one single woman to go, on such a sudden motion too, with so many gentlemen, is not right. But that need not hinder you, gentlemen. So, said he, the rest sent, that they should not dine at home, and they and Mr. Chambers, a gentleman lately settled in these parts, one and all came with me. And so, my dear, concluded he, when you make your appearance next Sunday, you're sure of a party in your favour, for all that see you must esteem you. He went to them, and when I came down to dinner, he was pleased to take me by the hand, at my entrance into the parlour, and said, My dear, I have brought some of my good neighbours to dine with you. I said, You are very good, sir. My dear, this gentleman is Mr. Chambers. And so he presented every one to me, and they saluted me, and wished us both joy. I, for my part, said Mr. Brooks, wish you joy most heartily. My wife told me a good deal of the beauties of your person, but I did not think we had such a flower in our country. Sir, said I, your lady is very partial to me, and you are so polite a gentleman, that you will not contradict your good lady. I'll assure you, madam, returned he, you have not hit the matter at all, for we contradict one another twice or thrice a day, but the devil's in't if we are not agreed in so clear a case. Said Mr. Martin, Mr. Brooks says very true, madam, in both respects, meaning his wife's and his own contradiction to one another, as well as in my favour. For, added he, they have been married some years. As I had not the best opinion of this gentleman, nor his jest, I said, I am almost sorry, sir, for the gentleman's jest upon himself and his lady; but I think it should have relieved him from a greater jest, your pleasant confirmation of it. But still the reason you give that it may be so, I hope, is the reason that may be given that it is not so, to wit, that they have been married some years. Said Mr. Arthur, Mr. Martin, I think the lady has very handsomely reproved you. I think so too, said Mr. Chambers, and it was but a very indifferent compliment to a bride. Said Mr. Martin, compliment or not, gentlemen, I have never seen a matrimony of any time standing that it was not so, little or much; but I dare say it will never be so here. To be sure, sir, said I, if it was, I must be the ungratefullest person in the world, because I am the most obliged person in it. That notion, said Mr. Arthur, is so excellent, that it gives a moral certainty it never can. Sir, said Mr. Brooks to my dear master, softly, you have a most accomplished lady, I do assure you, as well in her behaviour and wit, as in her person, call her what you please. Why, my dear friend, said my master, I must tell you, as I have said before now, that her person made me her lover, but her mind made her my wife. The first course coming in, my dear sir led me himself to my place, and set Mr. Chambers, as the greatest stranger, at my right hand, and Mr. Brooks at my left, and Mr. Arthur was pleased to observe, much to my advantage, on the ease and freedom with which I behaved myself, and helped them; and said, he would bring his lady to be a witness, and a learner both, of my manners. I said, I should be proud of any honour Mrs. Arthur would vouchsafe to do me, and if once I could promise myself the opportunity of his good lady's example, and those of the other gentlemen present, I should have the greater opinion of my worthiness to sit in the place I filled at present with much insufficiency. Mr. Arthur drank to my health and happiness, and said, My wife told your spouse, madam, you had very good luck in such a husband; But I now see who has the best of it. Said Mr. Brooks, Come, come, let's make no compliments, for the plain truth of the matter is, our good neighbour's generosity and judgment have met with so equal a match in his lady's beauty and merit, that I know not which has the best luck. But may you be both long happy together, say I. And so he drank a glass of wine. My best friend, who always takes delight to have me praised, seemed much pleased with our conversation; and he said the kindest, tenderest, and most respectful things in the world to me; insomuch that the rough Mr. Martin said, Did you ever think our good friend here, who used to ridicule matrimony so much, would have made so complaisant a husband? How long do you intend, sir, that this shall hold? As long as my good girl deserves it, said he, and that, I hope, will be for ever. But, continued the kind gentleman, you need not wonder I have changed my mind as to wedlock, for I never expected to meet with one whose behaviour and sweetness of temper were so well adapted to make me happy. After dinner, and having drank good healths to each of their ladies, I withdrew; and they sat and drank 2 bottles of claret apiece, and were very merry, and went away, full of my praises, and vowing to bring their ladies to see me. John having brought me your kind letter, my dear father, I told my good master, after his friends were gone, how gratefully you received his generous intentions as to the Kentish farm, and promised your best endeavours to serve him in that estate; and that you hoped your industry and care would be so well employed in it, that you should be very little troublesome to him. As to the liberal manner in which he had intended to add to a provision, that of itself exceeded all you wished. He was very well pleased with your cheerful acceptance of it. I am glad your engagements in the world lie in so small a compass. As soon as you have gotten an account of them exactly, you will be pleased to send it me, with the list of the poor folks you are so kind to promise to procure me. I think, as my dear master is so generous, you should account nothing that is plain too good. Pray don't be afraid of laying out upon yourselves. My dear sir intends you shall not, when you come to us, return to your old abode, but stay with us till you set out for Kent; and so you must dispose of yourselves accordingly. And I hope, my dear father, you have quite left off all slavish business. As Farmer Jones has been kind to you, as I have heard you say, pray, when you take leave of them, present them with 3 guineas worth of good books, such as a family Bible, a common prayer, a whole duty of man, or any other you think will be acceptable, for they live a great way from church, and in winter the ways from their farm thither are impassable. He has brought me my papers safe, and I will send them to Lady Davers the first opportunity, down to the place I mentioned in my last. My dear Mr. B just now tells me, that he will carry me, in the morning, a little airing, about 10 miles off, in his chariot and 4, to breakfast at a farmhouse, noted for a fine dairy, and where, now and then, the neighbouring gentry of both sexes resort for that purpose. Thursday. We set out at about half an hour after 6 accordingly, and driving pretty smartly, got at this truly neat house at half an hour after 8, and I was much pleased with the neatness of the good woman, and her daughter and maid, and he was so good as to say he would now and then take a turn with me, to the same place, and on the same occasion, as I seemed to like it; for it would be a pretty exercise, and procure us appetites to our breakfasts, as well as our return would to our dinners. But I find this was not, though a very good reason, the only one for which he gave me this agreeable airing, as I shall acquaint you. We were prettily received and entertained here, and an elegancy ran through every thing, persons as well as furniture, yet all plain. And my master said to the good housewife, Do your young boarding-school ladies still at times continue their visits to you, Mrs. Dobson? Yes, sir, said she, I expect 3 or 4 of them every minute. There is, my dear, said he, within 3 miles of this farm, a very good boarding school for ladies. The governess of it keeps a chaise and pair, which is to be made a double chaise at pleasure. And in summer time, when the misses perform their tasks to satisfaction, she favours them with an airing to this place, 3 or 4 at a time; and after they have breakfasted, they are carried back; and this serves both for a reward and for exercise; and the misses who have this favour are not a little proud of it; and it brings them forward in their respective tasks. A very good method, sir, said I. And just as we were talking, the chaise came in with 4 misses, all pretty much of a size, and a maid servant to attend them. They were shown another little neat apartment, that went through ours; and made their honours very prettily as they passed by us. I went into the room to them, and asked them questions about their work, and their lessons, and what they had done to deserve such a fine airing and breakfasting; and they all answered me very prettily. And pray, little ladies, said I, what may I call your names? One was called Miss Burdoff, one Miss Nugent, one Miss Booth, and the 4th Miss Goodwin. I don't know which, said I, is the prettiest; but you are all best, my little dears, and you have a very good governess, to indulge you with such a fine airing, and such delicate cream and bread and butter. I hope you think so too. My master came in, and I had no mistrust in the world; and he kissed each of them; but looked more wishfully on Miss Goodwin than on any of the others; but I thought nothing just then. Had she been called Miss Godfrey, I had hit upon it in a trice. When we went from them, he said, Which do you think the prettiest of all those misses? Really, sir, said I, it is very hard to say. Miss Booth is a pretty brown girl, and has a fine eye. Miss Burdoff has a great deal of sweetness in her countenance, but is not so regularly featured. Miss Nugent is very fair, and Miss Goodwin has a fine black eye, and is besides, I think, the genteelest shaped child; but they are all pretty. The maid led them into the garden, to show them the beehives; and Miss Goodwin made a particular fine courtesy to my master; and I said, I believe miss knows you, sir. And, taking her by the hand, I said, Do you know this gentleman, my pretty dear? Yes, madam, said she, it is my own dear uncle. I clasped her in my arms. Oh, why did you not tell me, sir, said I, that you had a niece among these little ladies? And I kissed her, and away she tripped after the others. But pray, sir, said I, how can this be? You have no sister nor brother, but Lady Davers. How can this be? He smiled, and then I said, O my dearest sir, tell me now the truth. Does not this pretty miss stand in a nearer relation to you, than as a niece? I know she does. I know she does. And I embraced him as he stood. 'Tis even so, my dear, replied he. And you remember my sister's good-natured hint of Miss Sally Godfrey? I do well, sir, said I. But this is Miss Goodwin. Her mother chose that name for her, said he, because she should not be called by her own. Well, said I, excuse me, sir, I must go and have a little prattle with her. I'll send for her in again, replied he. And in she came in a moment. I took her in my arms, and said, O my charming dear, will you love me? Will you let me be your aunt? Yes, madam, answered she, with all my heart, and I will love you dearly; but I mustn't love my uncle. Why so? said he. Because, replied she, you would not speak to me at first; and because you would not let me call you uncle, for it seems she was bid not, that I might not guess at her presently. And yet, said the pretty dear, I had not seen you a great while, so I hadn't. Well, Pamela, said he, now can you allow me to love this little innocent? Allow you, sir, replied I. You would be very barbarous if you did not, and I should be more so, if I did not further it all I could, and love the little lamb myself, for your sake and for her own sake, and in compassion to her poor mother, though unknown to me. And tears stood in my eyes. Said he, Why, my love, are your words so kind, and your countenance so sad? I drew to the window from the child, and said, Sad it is not, sir, but I have a strange grief and pleasure mingled at once in my breast, on this occasion. It is indeed a twofold grief, and a twofold pleasure. As how, my dear? said he. Why, sir, replied I cannot help being grieved for the poor mother of this sweet babe, to think, if she be living, that she must call her chiefest delight her shame; if she be no more, that she must have had such remorse on her poor mind, when she came to leave the world, and her little babe. And, in the second place, I grieve, that it must be thought a kindness to the dear little soul, not to let her know how near the dearest relation she has in the world is to her. Forgive me, dear sir, I say not this to reproach you in the least; indeed I don't; and I have a twofold cause of joy. First, that I have had the grace to escape the like unhappiness with this poor gentlewoman; and second, that this discovery has given me an opportunity to show the sincerity of my grateful affection for you, sir, in the love I will always express to this dear child. And then I stepped to her again, and kissed her, and said, Join with me, my pretty love, to beg your dear uncle to let you come and live with your new aunt. Indeed, my little precious, I'll love you dearly. Will you, sir? said the little charmer. Will you let me go and live with my aunt? You are very good, my Pamela, said he, and I have not once been deceived in the hopes my fond heart has entertained of your prudence. But will you, sir? said I, will you grant me this favour? I shall most certainly love the little charmer, and all I am capable of doing for her, both by example and affection, shall most cordially be done. My dearest sir, added I, oblige me in this thing. I think already my heart is set upon it. What a sweet employment and companionship shall I have! We'll talk of this some other time, replied he, but I must, in prudence, put some bounds to your amiable generosity. I had always intended to surprise you into this discovery, but my sister led the way to it, out of a poorness in her spite that I could not brook. And though you have pleased me beyond expression in your behaviour on this occasion, yet I can't say that you have gone much beyond my expectations, for I have such a high opinion of you, that I think nothing could have shaken it, but a contrary conduct to this you have expressed on so tender a circumstance. Well, sir, said the dear little miss, then you will not let me go home with my aunt, will you? I am sure she will love me. When you break up next, my dear, said he, if you are a good girl, you shall pay your new aunt a visit. She made a low courtesy. Thank you, sir, answered she. Yes, my dear, said I, and I will get you some fine things against the time. I would have brought you some now, had I known I should have seen my pretty love. Thank you, madam, returned she. How old, sir, said I, is miss? Between 6 and 7, answered he. Was she ever, sir, said I, at your house? My sister, replied he, carried her hither once, as a dear relation of her lord's. I remember, sir, said I, a little miss, and Mrs. Jervis and I took her to be a relation of Lord Davers. My sister, returned he, knew the whole secret from the beginning, and it made her a great merit with me, that she kept it from the knowledge of my father, who was then living, and of my mother to her dying day, though she descended so low in her rage to hint the matter to you. The little misses took their leaves soon after, and I know not how, but I am strangely affected with this dear child. I wish he would be so good as to let me have her home. It would be a great pleasure to have such a fine opportunity, obliged as I am, to show my love for himself, in my fondness for his dear miss. As we came home together in the chariot, he gave me the following particulars of this affair, additional to what he had before mentioned. That this lady was of a good family, and the flower of it, but that her mother was a person of great art and address, and not altogether so nice in the particular between himself and miss, as she ought to have been; that particularly, when she had reason to find him unsettled and wild, and her daughter in more danger from him than he was from her, yet she encouraged their privacies; and even at last, when she had reason to apprehend, from their being surprised together, in a way not so creditable to the lady, that she was far from forbidding their private meetings; on the contrary, that, on a certain time, she had set one that had formerly been her footman, and a half-pay officer, her relation, to watch an opportunity, and to frighten him into a marriage with the lady; that accordingly, when they had surprised him in her chamber, just as he had been let in, they drew their swords upon him, and threatened instantly to kill him, if he did not propose marriage on the spot; and that they had a parson ready below stairs, as he found afterwards; that then he suspected, from some strong circumstances, that Miss was in the plot; which so enraged him, with their menaces together, that he drew, and stood upon his defense; and was so much in earnest, that the man he pushed into the arm, and disabled; and pressing prettily forward upon the other, as he retreated, and rushed in upon him near the top of the stairs, and pushed him down one pair, and he was much hurt by the fall; not but that, he said, he might have paid for his rashness; but that the business of his antagonists was rather to frighten than to kill him; that, upon this, in the sight of the old lady, the parson she had provided, and her other daughters, he went out of their house, with bitter execrations against them all. That after this, designing to break off all correspondence with the whole family, and Miss too, she found means to engage him to give her a meeting at Woodstock, in order to clear herself; that, poor lady, she was there obliged, naughty creature as he was, to make herself quite guilty of a worse fault, in order to clear herself of a lighter; that they afterwards met at Godstow often, at Woodstock, and every neighboring place to Oxford, where he was then studying, as it proved guilty lessons, instead of improving ones; till, at last, the effect of their frequent interviews grew too obvious to be concealed; that the young lady then, when she was not fit to be seen, for the credit of the family, was confined, and all manner of means were used to induce him to marry her; that, finding nothing would do, they at last resolved to complain to his father and mother; but that he made his sister acquainted with the matter, who then happened to be at home, and, by her management and spirit, their intentions of that sort were frustrated, and, seeing no hopes, they agreed to Lady Davers's proposals, and sent poor Miss down to Marlborough, where, at her expense, which he answered to her again, she was provided for and privately lay in; that Lady Davers took upon herself the care of the little one, till it came to be fit to be put to the boarding school, where it now is; and that he had settled upon the dear little miss such a sum of money, as the interest of it would handsomely provide for her, and the principal would be a tolerable fortune, fit for a gentlewoman, when she came to be marriageable. And this, my dear, said he, is the story in brief. And I do assure you, Pamela, added he, I am far from making a boast of, or taking pride in, this affair. But since it has happened, I can't say but I wish the poor child to live and be happy, and I must endeavour to make her so. Sir, said I, to be sure you should, and I shall take a very great pride to contribute to the dear little soul's felicity, if you will permit me to have her home. But, added I, does Miss know anything who are her father and mother? I wanted him to say if the poor lady was living or dead. No, answered he. Her governess has been told, by my sister, that she is the daughter of a gentleman and his lady, who are related, at a distance, to Lord Davers, and now live in Jamaica. And she calls me uncle, only because I am the brother to Lady Davers, whom she calls aunt, and who is very fond of her; as is also my lord, who knows the whole matter; and they have her, at all her little school recesses, at their house, and are very kind to her. I believe, added he, the truth of the matter is very little known or suspected; for, as her mother is of no mean family, her friends endeavour to keep it secret, as much as I; And Lady Davers, till her wrath boiled over t'other day, has managed the matter very dexterously and kindly. The words, mother is of no mean family, gave me not to doubt the poor lady was living. And I said, But how, sir, can the dear Mrs. poor mother be content to deny herself the enjoyment of so sweet a child? Ah, Pamela, replied he, now you come in. I see you want to know what's become of the poor mother. 'Tis natural enough you should. But I was willing to see how the little suspense would operate upon you. Dear sir, said I. Nay, replied he, 'tis very natural, my dear. I think you have had a great deal of patience, and are come at this question so fairly, that you deserve to be answered. You must know then there is some foundation for saying that her mother at least lives in Jamaica; for there she does live, and very happily too. For I must observe that she suffered so much in childbed, that nobody expected her life; and this, when she was up, made such an impression upon her, that she dreaded nothing so much as the thoughts of returning to her former fault. And, to say the truth, I had intended to make her a visit as soon as her month was well up. And so, unknown to me, she engaged herself to go to Jamaica with 2 young ladies who were born there, and were returning to their friends, after they had been 4 years in England for their education; and, recommending to me, by a very moving letter, her little baby, and that I would not suffer it to be called by her name, but Goodwin, that her shame might be the less known, for hers and her family's sake, she got her friends to assign her £500 in full of all her demands upon her family, and went up to London, and embarked with her companions at Gravesend, and so sailed to Jamaica, where she is since well and happily married, passing to her husband for a young widow with 1 daughter, which her husband's friends take care of and provide for. And so you see, Pamela, that in the whole story on both sides the truth is as much preserved as possible. Poor lady, said I, how her story moves me! I am glad she is so happy at last. And, my dear, said he, are you not glad she is so far off too? As to that, sir, said I cannot be sorry, to be sure, as she is so happy, which she could not have been here. For, sir, I doubt you would have proceeded with your temptations if she had not gone; and it shewed she was much in earnest to be good, that she could leave her native country, leave all her relations, leave you, whom she so well loved, leave her dear baby, and try a new fortune in a new world, among quite strangers, and hazard the seas; and all to preserve herself from further guiltiness. Indeed, sir, said I bleed for what her distresses must be. In this case I am grieved for her poor mind's remorse, through her child-bed terrors, which could have so great and so worthy an effect upon her afterwards. And I honour her resolution, and would rank such a returning dear lady in the class of those who are most virtuous, and doubt not God Almighty's mercy to her, and that her present happiness is the result of his gracious providence, blessing her penitence and reformation. But, sir, said I, did you not once see the poor lady after her lying in? I did not believe her so much in earnest, answered he, and I went down to Marlborough, and heard she was gone from thence to Calne. I went to Calne, and heard she was gone to Reading, to her relations there. Thither I went, and heard she was gone to Oxford. I followed, and there she was, but I could not see her. She at last received a letter from me, begging a meeting with her; for I found her departure with the ladies was resolved on, and that she was with her friends, only to take leave of them, and receive her agreed on portion. And she appointed the Saturday following, and that was Wednesday, to give me a meeting at the old place at Woodstock. Then, added he, I thought I was sure of her, and doubted not I should spoil her intended voyage. I set out on Thursday to Gloucester, on a party of pleasure, and on Saturday I went to the place appointed at Woodstock. But when I came thither, I found a letter instead of my lady, and when I opened it, it was to beg my pardon for deceiving me, expressing her concern for her past fault, her affection for me, and the apprehension she had, that she should be unable to keep her good resolves, if she met me; that she had set out on the Thursday for her embarkation; for that she feared nothing else could save her; and had appointed this meeting on Saturday, at the place of her former guilt, that I might be suitably impressed upon the occasion, and pity and allow for her; and that she might get 3 or 4 days start of me, and be quite out of my reach. She recommended again, as upon the spot where the poor little one owed its beginning, my tenderness to it for her sake; and that was all she had to request of me, she said; but would not forget to pray for me in all her own dangers, and in every difficulty she was going to encounter. I wept at this moving tale. And did not this make a deep impression upon you, sir? said I. Surely such an affecting lesson as this, on the very guilty spot too, I admire the dear lady's pious contrivance, must have had a great effect upon you. One would have thought, sir, it was enough to reclaim you for ever. All your naughty purposes, I make no doubt, were quite changed? Why, my dear, said he, I was much moved, you may be sure, when I came to reflect; but, at first, I was so assured of being a successful tempter, and spoiling her voyage, that I was vexed and much out of humour. But when I came to reflect, as I said, I was quite overcome with this instance of her prudence, her penitence, and her resolution, and more admired her than I ever had done. Yet I could not bear she should so escape me neither. So much overcome me, as it were, in an heroical bravery; and I hastened away, and got a bill of credit of Lord Davers, upon his banker in London, for £500, and set out for that place, having called at Oxford, and got what light I could, as to where I might hear of her there. When I arrived in town, which was not till Monday morning, I went to a place called Crosby Square, where the friends of the 2 ladies lived. She had set out in the flying coach on Tuesday, got to the 2 ladies that very night, and, on Saturday, had set out with them for Gravesend, much about the time I was expecting her at Woodstock. You may suppose that I was much affected, my dear, with this. However, I got my bill of credit converted into money, and I set out with my servant on Monday afternoon, and reached Gravesend that night; and there I understood that she and the 2 ladies had gone on board from the very inn I put up at, in the morning, and the ship waited only for the wind, which then was turning about in its favour. I got a boat directly, and went on board the ship, and asked for Mrs. Godfrey. But judge you, my dear Pamela, her surprise and confusion when she saw me. She had like to have fainted away. I offered any money to put off the sailing till next day, but it would not be complied with; and fain would I have got her on shore, and promised to attend her, if she would go over land, to any part of England the ship would touch at; but she was immovable. Every one concluded me her humble servant, and were touched at the moving interview; the young ladies, and their female attendants especially. With great difficulty, upon my solemn assurances of honour, she trusted herself with me in one of the cabins; and there I tried, what I could, to prevail upon her to quit her purpose; but all in vain. She said, I had made her quite unhappy by this interview. She had difficulties enough upon her mind before; but now I had embittered all her voyage, and given her the deepest distress. I could prevail upon her but for one favour, and that with the greatest reluctance, which was, to accept of the £500 as a present from me; and she promised, at my earnest desire, to draw upon me for a greater sum, as a person that had her effects in my hands, when she arrived, if she should find it convenient for her. In short, this was all the favour I could procure; for she would not promise so much as to correspond with me, and was determined on going; and, I believe, if I would have married her, which yet I had not in my head, she would not have deviated from her purpose. But how, sir, said I, did you part? I would have sailed with her, answered he, and been landed at the first port in England or Ireland, I cared not which, they should put in at. But she was too full of apprehensions to admit it; and the rough fellow of a master, captain they called him, but in my mind I could have thrown him overboard, would not stay a moment, the wind and tide being quite fair, and was very urgent with me to go ashore, or to go the voyage. And being impetuous in my temper, spoiled, you know, my dear, by my mother, and not used to control, I thought it very strange that wind or tide, or anything else, should be preferred to me and my money. But so it was. I was forced to go; and so took leave of the ladies and the other passengers; wished them a good voyage; gave 5 guineas among the ship's crew to be good to the ladies, and took such a leave as you may better imagine than I express. She recommended once more to me, the dear guest, as she called her, the ladies being present; and thanked me for all these instances of my regard, which, she said, would leave a strong impression on her mind; and, at parting, she threw her arms about my neck, and we took such a leave as affected every one present, men as well as ladies. So, with a truly heavy heart, I went down the ship's side to my boat; and stood up in it, looking at her, as long as I could see her, and she at me, with her handkerchief at her eyes; and then I gazed at the ship, till, and after I had landed, as long as I could discern the least appearance of it; for she was under sail, in a manner, when I left her; and so I returned highly disturbed to my inn. I went to bed, but rested not; returned to London the next morning, and set out that afternoon again for the country. And so much, my dear, for poor Sally Godfrey. She sends, I understand, by all opportunities, with the knowledge of her husband, to learn how her child, by her first husband, does; and has the satisfaction to know she is happily provided for. And, about half a year ago, her spouse sent a little negro boy, of about 10 years old, as a present, to wait upon her. But he was taken ill of the smallpox, and died in a month after he was landed. Sure, sir, said I, your generous mind must have been long affected with this melancholy case, and all its circumstances. It hung upon me, indeed, some time, said he, but I was full of spirit and inconsideration. I went soon after to travel; 100 new objects danced before my eyes, and kept reflection from me; and, you see, I had 5 or 6 years afterwards, and even before that, so thoroughly lost all the impressions you talk of, that I doubted not to make my Pamela change her name, without either act of parliament, or wedlock, and be Sally Godfrey the second. Oh, you dear naughty man, said I, this seems but too true; but I bless God that it is not so. I bless God for your reformation, and that for your own dear sake as well as mine. Well, my dear, said he, and I bless God for it too, I do most sincerely; and 'tis my greater pleasure, because I have, as I hoped, seen my error so early; and that with such a stock of youth and health on my side, in all appearance, I can truly abhor my past liberties, and pity poor Sally Godfrey, from the same motives that I admire my Pamela's virtues; and resolve to make myself as worthy of them as possible. And I will hope, my dear, your prayers for my pardon and my perseverance will be of no small efficacy on this occasion. These agreeable reflections, on this melancholy but instructive story, brought us in view of his own house; and we alighted, and took a walk in the garden, till dinner was ready. And now we are so busy about making ready for our appearance, that I shall hardly have time to write till that be over. Section 33.
Section 33 of Pamela or Virtue Rewarded. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Pamela or Virtue Rewarded by Samuel Richardson. Section 33. Monday morning. Yesterday we set out, attended by John, Abraham, Benjamin, and Isaac, in fine new liveries, in the best chariot, which had been new cleaned and lined, and new harnessed, so that it looked like a new one. But I had no arms to quarter with my dear lord and masters, though he jocularly, upon my taking notice of my obscurity, said, that he had a good mind to have the olive branch, which would allude to his hopes, quartered for mine. I was dressed in the suit that I mentioned, of white flowered with silver, and a rich head dress, and the diamond necklace, earrings, etc., I also mentioned before. And, my dear sir, in a fine laced silk waistcoat of blue paduasoy, and his coat a pearl-coloured fine cloth, with gold buttons and buttonholes, and lined with white silk, and he looked charmingly indeed. I said I was too fine, and would have laid aside some of the jewels. But he said, it would be thought a slight to me from him as his wife, and though, as I apprehended, it might be, that people would talk as it was, yet he would rather they should say anything, than that I was not put on an equal footing as his wife with any lady he might have married. It seems that the neighbouring gentry had expected us, and there was a great congregation, for, against my wish, we were a little of the latest, so that, as we walked up the church to his seat, we had an abundance of gazers and whisperers. But my dear master behaved with so intrepid an air, and was so cheerful and complaisant to me, that he did credit to his kind choice, instead of showing as if he were ashamed of it. And as I was resolved to busy my mind entirely with the duties of the day, my intentness on that occasion, and my thankfulness to God for his unspeakable mercies to me, so took up my thoughts, that I was much less concerned than I should otherwise have been, at the gazings and whisperings of the ladies and gentlemen, as well as of the rest of the congregation, whose eyes were all turned to our seat. When the sermon was ended, we stayed the longer, because the church should be pretty empty. But we found great numbers at the church doors and in the church porch, and I had the pleasure of hearing many commendations as well of my person as my dress and behaviour, and not one reflection or mark of disrespect. Mr. Martin, who was single, Mr. Chambers, Mr. Arthur, and Mr. Brooks, with their families, were all there. And the four gentlemen came up to us before we went into the chariot, and in a very kind and respectful manner complimented us both. And Mrs. Arthur and Mrs. Brooks were so kind as to wish me joy. And Mrs. Brooks said, you sent Mr. Brooks, madam, home the other day, quite charmed with a manner which, you have convinced 1,000 persons this day, is natural to you. You do me great honour, madam, replied I. Such a good lady's approbation must make me too sensible of my happiness. My dear master handed me into the chariot, and stood talking with Sir Thomas Atkins at the door of it, who was making him abundance of compliments, and is a very ceremonious gentleman, a little too extreme in that way, and, I believe, to familiarize me to the gazers, which concerned me a little; for I was dashed to hear the praises of the country people, and to see how they crowded about the chariot. Several poor people begged my charity, and I beckoned John with my fan, and said, divide in the church porch that money to the poor, and let them come to-morrow morning to me, and I will give them something more, if they don't importune me now. So I gave him all the silver I had, which happened to be between 20 and 30 shillings, and this drew away from me their clamorous prayers for charity. Mr. Martin came up to me on the other side of the chariot, and leaned on the very door, while my master was talking to Sir Thomas, from whom he could not get away, and said, by all that's good, you have charmed the whole congregation. Not a soul but is full of your praises. My neighbour knew, better than anybody could tell him, how to choose for himself. Why, said he, the dean himself looked more upon you than his book. Oh, sir, said I, you are very encouraging to a weak mind. I vow, said he, I say no more than is the truth. I'd marry to-morrow, if I was as sure of meeting with a person of but one half the merit you have. You are, continued he, and 'tis not my saying so to praise too much, an ornament to your sex, an honour to your spouse, and a credit to religion. Everybody is saying so, added he, for you have by your piety edified the whole church. As he had done speaking, the dean himself complimented me, that the behaviour of so worthy a lady would be very edifying to his congregation, and encouraging to himself. Sir, said I, you are very kind. I hope I shall not behave unworthy of the good instructions I shall have the pleasure to receive from so worthy a divine. He bowed and went on. Sir Thomas then applied to me, my master stepping into the chariot, and said, I beg pardon, madam, for detaining your good spouse from you, but I have been saying he is the happiest man in the world. I bowed to him, but I could have wished him further, to make me sit so in the notice of every one, which, for all I could do, dashed me not a little. Mr. Martin said to my master, If you'll come to church every Sunday with your charming lady, I will never absent myself, and she'll give a good example to all the neighbourhood. Oh, my dear sir, said I to my master, you know not how much I am obliged to good Mr. Martin. He has, by his kind expressions, made me dare to look up with pleasure and gratitude. Said my master, My dear love, I am very much obliged, as well as you, to my good friend Mr. Martin. And he said to him, We will constantly go to church, and to every other place, where we can have the pleasure of seeing Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin said, Gad, you are a happy man, and I think your lady's example has made you more polite and handsome too, than I ever knew you before, though we never thought you unpolite neither. And so he bowed and went to his own chariot, and as we drove away, the people kindly blessed us, and called us a charming pair. As I have no other pride, I hope, in repeating these things, than in the countenance that general approbation gives to my dear master for his stooping so low, you will excuse me for it, I know. In the afternoon we went again to church, and a little early at my request, but the church was quite full, and soon after even crowded, so much does novelty, the more's the pity, attract the eyes of mankind. Mr. Martin came in after and made up to our seat, and said, If you please, my dear friend, I will take my seat with you this afternoon. With all my heart, said my master. I was sorry for it, but resolved my duty should not be made second to bashfulness or any other consideration. And when divine service began, I withdrew to the farther end of the pew, and left the gentlemen in the front, and they behaved quite suitably, both of them, to the occasion. I mention this the rather, because Mr. Martin was not very noted for coming to church, or attention when there, before. The dean preached again, which he was not used to do, out of compliment to us, and an excellent sermon he made on the relative duties of Christianity. And it took my particular attention, for he made many fine observations on the subject. Mr. Martin addressed himself twice or thrice to me during the sermon, but he saw me so wholly engrossed with hearkening to the good preacher, that he forbore interrupting me. Yet I took care, according to the lessons formerly given me, to observe to him a cheerful and obliging behaviour, as one of Mr. B.'s friends and intimates. My master asked him to give us his company to supper, and he said, I am so taken with your lady, that you must not give me too much encouragement, for I shall be always with you if you do. He was pleased to say, You cannot favour us with too much of your company, and as I have left you in the lurch in your single state, I think you will do well to oblige us as much as you can, and who knows but my happiness may reform another rake? Who knows, said Mr. Martin. Why, I know, for I am more than half reformed already. At the chariot door, Mrs. Arthur, Mrs. Brooks, and Mrs. Chambers were brought to me by their respective spouses, and presently the witty Lady Towers, who bantered me before, as I once told you, joined them, and Mrs. Arthur said she wished me joy, and that all good ladies, my neighbours, would collect themselves together and make me a visit. This, I said, will be an honour, madam, that I can never enough acknowledge. It will be very kind so to countenance a person who will always study to deserve your favour by the most respectful behaviour. Lady Towers said, My dear neighbour, you want no countenance. Your own merit is sufficient. I had a slight cold that kept me at home in the morning, but I heard you so much talked of and praised, that I resolved not to stay away in the afternoon, and I join in the joy every one gives you. She turned to my master and said, You are a sly thief, as I always thought you. Where have you stolen this lady? And now, how barbarous is it, thus unawares, in a manner, to bring her here upon us, to mortify and eclipse us all. You are very kind, madam, said he, that you and all my worthy neighbours see with my eyes. But had I not known she had so much excellency of mind and behaviour as would strike everybody in her favour at first sight, I should not have dared to class her with such of my worthy neighbours as now so kindly congratulate us both. I own, said she softly, I was one of your censurers, but I never liked you so well in my life as for this action. Now I see how capable your bride is of giving distinction to any condition. And coming to me, my dear neighbour, said she, excuse me for having but in my thoughts the remembrance that I have seen you formerly, when, by your sweet air and easy deportment, you so much surpass us all, and give credit to your present happy condition. Dear good madam, said I, how shall I suitably return my acknowledgments? But it will never be a pain to me to look back upon my former days, now I have the kind allowance and example of so many worthy ladies to support me in the honours to which the most generous of men has raised me. Sweetly said, she was pleased to say. If I was in another place, I would kiss you for that answer. O happy, happy Mr. B, said she to my master, what reputation have you not brought upon your judgment? I won't be long before I see you, added she. I'll assure you if I come by myself. That shall be your own fault, madam, said Mrs. Brooks. And so they took leave, and I gave my hand to my dear master, and said, How happy have you made me, generous sir! And the dean, who had just come up, heard me, and said, And how happy you have made your spouse, I'll venture to pronounce, is hard to say, from what I observe of you both. I curtsied and blushed, not thinking anybody heard me. And my master telling him he should be glad of the honour of a visit from him, he said, he would pay his respects to us the first opportunity, and bring his wife and daughter to attend me. I said, that was doubly kind, and I should be very proud of cultivating so worthy an acquaintance. I thanked him for his kind discourse, and he thanked me for my attention, which he called exemplary, and so my dear master handed me into the chariot, and we were carried home, both happy and both pleased, thank God. Mr. Martin came in the evening with another gentleman, his friend, one Mr. Dormer, and he entertained us with the favourable opinion, he said, every one had of me, and of the choice my good benefactor had made. This morning the poor came, according to my invitation, and I sent them away with glad hearts to the number of 25. There were not above 12 or 14 on Sunday, that John divided the silver among, which I gave him for the purpose, but others got hold of the matter, and made up the above number. Tuesday. My generous master has given me this morning a most considerate, but yet, from the nature of it, melancholy instance of his great regard for my unworthiness, which I never could have wished, hoped for, or even thought of. He took a walk with me after breakfast into the garden, and a little shower falling, he led me, for shelter, into the little summer house in the private garden, where he formerly gave me apprehensions. And, sitting down by me, he said, I have now finished all that lies on my mind, my dear, and am very easy. For have you not wondered, that I have so much employed myself in my library? Been so much at home, and yet not in your company? No, sir, said I have never been so impertinent as to wonder at anything you please to employ yourself about, nor would give way to a curiosity that should be troublesome to you. And besides, I know your large possession, and the method you take of looking yourself into your affairs must needs take up so much of your time, that I ought to be very careful how I intrude upon you. Well, he said, but I'll tell you what has been my last work. I have taken it into my consideration, that, at present, my line is almost extinct, and that the chief part of my maternal estate, in case I should die without issue, will go to another line, and a great part of my personal will fall into such hands as I should not care my Pamela should be at the mercy of. I have therefore, as human life is uncertain, made such a disposition of my affairs as will make you absolutely independent and happy, as will secure to you the power of doing a great deal of good, and living as a person ought to do, who is my relict, and shall put it out of anybody's power to molest your father and mother in the provision I design them, for the remainder of their days. And I have finished all this very morning, except to naming trustees for you. And if you have anybody you would confide in more than another, I would have you speak. I was so touched with this mournful instance of his excessive goodness to me, and the thoughts necessarily flowing from the solemn occasion, that I was unable to speak, and at last relieved my mind by a violent fit of weeping, and could only say, clasping my arms round the dear generous man, "How shall I support this? So cruel, yet so very kind." "Don't, my dear," said he, "be concerned at what gives me pleasure. I am not the nearer to my end for having made this disposition, but I think the putting off of these material points, when so many accidents every day happen, and life is so precarious, is one of the most inexcusable things in the world. And there are many important points to be thought of when life is drawing to its utmost verge, and the mind may be so agitated and unfit that it is a most sad thing to put off to that time any of those concerns which more especially require a considerate and composed frame of temper, and perfect health and vigour, to give directions about. My poor friend Mr. Carlton, who died in my arms so lately, and had a mind disturbed by worldly considerations to one side, a weakness of body, through the violence of his distemper on another, and the concerns of still as much more moment, as the soul is to a body, on a third, made so great an impression upon me then, that I was the more impatient to come to this house, where were most of my writings, in order to make the disposition I have now perfected. And since it is grievous to my dear girl, I will myself think of such trustees as shall be most to her benefit. I have only, therefore, to assure you, my dear, that in this instance, as I will do in any other I can think of, I have studied to make you quite easy, free, and independent. And because I shall avoid all occasions for the future which may discompose you, I have but one request to make, which is, that if it pleases God for my sins to separate me from my dearest Pamela, you will only resolve not to marry one person, for I would not be such a Herod as to restrain you from a change of condition with any other, however reluctantly I may think of any other person's succeeding me in your esteem. I could not answer, and thought my heart would have burst, and he continued, "To conclude at once a subject that is so grievous to you, I will tell you, my dear Pamela, that this person is Mr. Williams. And now I will acquaint you with my motive for this request, which is wholly owing to my niceness, and to no dislike I have for him, or apprehension of any likelihood that it will be so. But methinks it would reflect a little upon my Pamela, if she was to give way to such conduct, as if she had married a man for his estate, when she had rather had another, had it not been for that. And that now, the world will say, she is at liberty to pursue her inclination, the parson is the man. And I cannot bear even the most distant apprehension that I had not the preference with you of any man living, let me have been what I would, as I have shown my dear life, that I have preferred her to all your sex, of whatever degree." I could not speak, might if I had the world. And he took me in his arms, and said, "I have now spoken all my mind, and expect no answer, and I see you too much moved to give me one. Only forgive me the mention, since I have told you my motive, which as much affects your reputation as my niceness, and offer not an answer, only say you forgive me, and I hope I have not one discomposing thing to say to my dearest for the rest of my life, which I pray God, for both our sakes, to lengthen for many happy years. Grief still choked up the passage of my words, and he said, "The shower is over, my dear. Let us walk out again." He led me out, and I would have spoken, but he said, "I will not hear my dear creature say anything. To hearken to your assurance of complying with my request would look as if I doubted you and wanted it. I am confident I needed only to speak my mind to be observed by you, and I shall never more think on the subject, if you don't remind me of it." He then most sweetly changed the discourse. "Don't you, with pleasure, my dear," said he, "take in the delightful fragrance that this sweet shower has given to those banks of flowers? Your presence is so enlivening to me that I could almost fancy that what we owe to the shower is owing to that. And all nature, methinks, blooms around me when I have my Pamela by my side. You are a poetess, my dear, and I will give a few lines that I made myself on such an occasion as this I am speaking of, the presence of a sweet companion, and the fresh verdure that, after a shower succeeding a long drought, showed itself throughout all vegetable nature. And then, in a sweet and easy accent, with his dear arms about me as we walked, he sung me the following verses, of which he afterwards favoured me with a copy. All nature blooms when you appear, the fields their richest liveries wear, oaks, elms, and pines, blessed with your view, shoot out fresh greens and bud anew. The varying seasons you supply, and when you're gone they fade and die. Sweet Philomel in mournful strains to you appeals, to you complains. The towering lark on rising wing warbles to you, your praise does sing. He cuts the yielding air and flies to heaven to type your future joys. The purple violet damask grows, each to delight your senses blows. The lilies ope as you appear, and all the beauties of the year diffuse their odours at your feet, who give to every flower its sweet. For flowers and women are allied, both nature's glory and her pride. Of every fragrance sweet possessed, they bloom but for the fair one's breast, and to the swelling bosom borne, each other mutually adorn. Thus sweetly did he palliate the woes, which the generosity of his action, mixed with the solemnness of the occasion, and the strange request he had vouchsafed me to make, had occasioned. And all he would permit me to say was, that I was not displeased with him. "Displeased with you, dearest sir," said I. "Let me thus testify my obligations, and the force all your commands shall have upon me." And I took the liberty to clasp my arms around his neck and kissed him. But yet my mind was pained at times, and has been to this hour. God grant that I may never see the dreadful moment that shall shut up the precious life of this excellent, generous benefactor of mine. But I cannot bear to suppose, I cannot say more on such a deep subject. Oh, what a poor thing is human life in its best enjoyment, subjected to imaginary evils when it has no real ones to disturb it, and that can be made as effectually unhappy by its apprehensions of remote contingencies as if it were struggling with the pangs of a present distress. This, duly reflected upon, methinks, should convince every one that this world is not a place for the immortal mind to be confined to, and that there must be a hereafter, when the whole soul shall be satisfied. But I shall get out of my depth. My shallow mind cannot comprehend, as it ought, these weighty subjects. Let me only therefore pray, that, after having made a grateful use of God's mercies here, I may, with my dear benefactor, rejoice in that happy state where is no mixture, no unsatisfiedness, and where all is joy and peace and love for evermore. I said, when we sat at supper, "The charming taste you gave me, sir, of your poetical fancy, makes me sure you have more favours of this kind to delight me with, if you please. And may I beg to be indulged on this agreeable head? Hitherto," said he, "my life has been too much a life of gaiety and action to be busied so innocently. Some little essays I have now and then attempted, but very few have I completed. Indeed, I had not patience nor attention enough to hold me long to any one thing. Now and then, perhaps, I may occasionally show you what I have essayed, but I could never please myself in this way. Friday. We were yesterday favoured with the company of almost all the neighbouring gentlemen and their ladies, who, by appointment with one another, met to congratulate our happiness. Nothing could be more obliging, more free and affectionate than the ladies, nothing more polite than the gentlemen. All was performed, for they came to supper, with decency and order, and much to every one's satisfaction, which was principally owing to good Mrs. Jervis's care and skill, who was an excellent manager. For my part, I was dressed out only to be admired, as it seems, and truly, if I had not known that I did not make myself as you, my dear father, once hinted to me, and if I had had the vanity to think as well of myself as the good company was pleased to do, I might possibly have been proud. As my Lady Davers said, though in anger, yet in truth, that I am but a poor bit of painted dirt. All that I value myself upon is, that God has raised me to a condition to be useful, in my generation, to better persons than myself. This is my pride, and I hope this will be all my pride. For what was I of myself? All the good I can do is but a poor third-hand good, for my dearest master himself is but the second hand. God, the all-gracious, the all-good, the all-bountiful, the almighty, the all-merciful God, is the first. To him, therefore, be all the glory. As I expect the happiness, the unspeakable happiness, my ever dear and ever honoured father and mother, of enjoying you both here under this roof so soon, and pray let it be as soon as you can, I will not enter into the particulars of the last agreeable evening, for I shall have 1,000 things as well as that to talk to you upon. I fear you will be tired with my prattle when I see you. I am to return these visits singly, and there were 8 ladies here of different families. Dear heart, I shall find enough to do. I doubt my time will not be so well filled up as I once promised my dear master. But he is pleased, cheerful, kind, and affectionate. Oh, what a happy creature am I! May I always be thankful to God, and grateful to him. When all these tumultuous visitings are over, I shall have my mind, I hope, subside into a family calm, that I may make myself a little useful to the household of my dear master, or else I shall be an unprofitable servant indeed. Lady Davers sent this morning her compliments to us both, very affectionately, and her lord's good wishes and congratulations, and she desired my writings per bearer, and says she will herself bring them to me again, with thanks, as soon as she had read them, and she and her lord will come and be my guests, that was her particularly kind word, for a fortnight. I have now but one thing to wish for, and then methinks I shall be all ecstasy, and that is your presence, both of you, and your blessings, which I hope you will bestow upon me every morning and night, till you are settled in the happy manner my dear Mr. B. has intended. Methinks I want sadly your list of the honest and worthy poor, for the money lies by me, and brings me no interest. You see, I am become a mere usurer, and want to make use upon use, and yet, when I have done all, I cannot do so much as I ought. God forgive my imperfections. I tell my dear spouse I want another dairy-house visit. To be sure, if he won't at present permit it, I shall, if it please God to spare us, tease him like any over-indulged wife. If, as the dear charmer grows older, he won't let me have the pleasure of forming her tender mind as well as I am able, lest, poor soul, she falls into such snares as her poor dear unhappy mothers fell into. I am providing a power of pretty things for her, against I see her next, that I may make her love me if I can. Just now I have the blessed news that you will set out for this happy house on Tuesday morning. The chariot shall be with you without fail. God give us a happy meeting. Oh, how I long for it! Forgive your impatient daughter, who sends this to amuse you on your journey, and desires to be, Ever more dutifully yours. Here end at present the letters of Pamela to her father and mother. They arrived at their daughter's house on Tuesday evening in the following week, and were received by her with the utmost joy and duty, and with what great goodness and compliance by Mr. B. And having resided there till everything was put in order for them at the Kentish estate, they were carried down thither by himself and their daughter, and put into possession of the pretty farm he had designed for them. The reader will here indulge us in a few brief observations, which naturally result from the story and the characters, and which will serve as so many applications of its most material incidents to the minds of youth of both sexes. First, then, in the character of the gentleman, may be seen that of a fashionable libertine, who allowed himself in the free indulgence of his passions, especially to the fair sex, and found himself supported in his daring attempts by an affluent fortune in possession, a personal bravery, as it is called, readier to give than to take offence, and an imperious will. Yet has he betimes sees his errors and reforms in the bloom of youth, an edifying lesson may be drawn from it, for the use of such as are born to large fortunes, and who may be taught by his example the inexpressible differences between the hazards and remorse which attend a profligate course of life, and the pleasures which flow from virtuous love and benevolent actions. In the character of Lady Davers, let the proud and high-born see the deformity of unreasonable passion, and how weak and ridiculous such persons must appear who suffer themselves, as is usually the case, to be hurried from the height of violence to the most abject submission, and subject themselves to be outdone by the humble virtue they so much despise. Let good clergymen in Mr. Williams see, that whatever displeasures the doing of their duty may give, for a time, to their proud patrons, Providence will at last reward their piety, and turn their distresses to triumph, and make them even more valued for a conduct that gives offence while the violence of passion lasted, than if they had meanly stooped to flatter or soothe the vices of the great. In the examples of good old Andrews and his wife, let those who are reduced to a low estate see that Providence never fails to reward their honesty and integrity, and that God will, in his own time, extricate them, by means unforeseen, out of their present difficulties, and reward them with benefits unhoped for. The upper servants of great families may, from the odious characters of Mrs. Jewkes and the amiable ones of Mrs. Jervis, Mr. Longman, etc., learn what to avoid and what to choose, to make themselves valued and esteemed by all those who know them. And from the double conduct of poor John, the lower servants may learn fidelity, and how to distinguish between the lawful and unlawful commands of a superior. The poor deluded female, who, like the once unhappy Miss Godfrey, had given up her honour and yielded to the allurements of her designing lover, may learn from her story to stop at the first fault, and by resolving to repent and amend, see the pardon and blessing which await her penitence, and a kind Providence ready to extend the arms of its mercy to receive and reward her returning duty; while the prostitute, pursuing the wicked courses into which perhaps she was at first inadvertently drawn, hurries herself into filthy diseases and an untimely death, and too probably into everlasting perdition. Let the desponding heart be comforted by the happy issue which the troubles and trials of Pamela met with, when they see, in her case, that no danger or distress, however inevitable or deep to their apprehensions, can be out of the power of Providence to obviate or relieve, and which, as in various instances in her story, can turn the most seemingly grievous things to its own glory, and the rewarding of suffering innocence, and that, too, at a time when all human prospects seem to fail. Let the rich, and those who are exalted from a low to a high estate, learn from her, that they are not promoted only for a single good, but that Providence has raised them that they should dispense to all within their reach the blessings it has heaped upon them, and that the greater the power is to which God has raised them, the greater is the good that will be expected from them. From the low opinion she everywhere shows of herself, and her attributing all her excellence to pious education and her lady's virtuous instructions and bounty, let persons, even of genius and piety, learn not to arrogate to themselves those gifts and graces which they owe least of all to themselves, since the beauties of persons are frail, and it is not in our power to give them to ourselves, or to be either prudent, wise, or good, without the assistance of divine grace. From the same good example let children see what a blessing awaits their duty to their parents, though ever so low in the world, and that the only disgrace is to be dishonest, but none at all to be poor. From the economy she purposes to observe in her elevation, let even ladies of condition learn, that there are family employments in which they may and ought to make themselves useful, and give good examples to their inferiors as well as equals, and that their duty to God, charity of the poor and sick, and the different branches of household management ought to take up the most considerable portion of their time. From her signal veracity, which she never forfeited in all the hardships she was tried with, though her answers, as she has reason to apprehend, would often make against her, and the innocence she preserved through all her stratagems and contrivances to save herself from violation, persons, even sorely tempted, may learn to preserve a sacred regard to truth, which always begets a reverence for them, even in the corruptest minds. In short, her obliging behaviour to her equals, before her exaltation, her kindness to them afterwards, her forgiving spirit, and her generosity. Her meekness in every circumstance where her virtue was not concerned. Her charitable allowances for others, as in the case of Miss Godfrey, for faults she would not have forgiven in herself. Her kindness and prudence to the offspring of that melancholy adventure. Her maiden and bridal purity, which extended as well to her thoughts as to her words and actions. Her signal affiance in God. Her thankful spirit, her grateful heart. Her diffuse charity to the poor, which made her blessed by them whenever she appeared abroad. The cheerful ease and freedom of her deportment. Her parental, conjugal, and maternal duty. Her social virtues. Are all so many signal instances of the excellency of her mind, which may make her character worthy of the imitation of her sex; and the editor of these sheets will have his end, if it inspires a laudable emulation in the minds of any worthy persons, who may thereby entitle themselves to the rewards, the praises, and the blessing, by which Pamela was so deservedly distinguished. The End. End of section 33. End of Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, by Samuel Richardson.